hear me fine?
I hear you just fine. I'm trying to see if my AirPods are connected right because I hear you through my computer speakers. I don't know how I sound though.
You sound great.
Okay, that's
Mhm.
as long as I sound good to you, that's fine. I won't mess with anything.
Okay, good.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, you can call me Max or MC or whatever. Can I call you JD or?
Yeah, JD is perfect. Thanks.
Okay, okay,
Thanks. I appreciate it. Where are
good.
you located exactly?
I live in Germany, like
Oh,
right in the middle of Germany, right in the center, and yeah, I practiced a lot
awesome.
of. I talked a lot of English growing up, so my English is pretty okay. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Yes. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, I appreciate you having me.
Okay. Yeah, we can either just go through the questions one by one, or we can also like have, of course, a little bit of discussion or something. Uh, I'm sure if a question comes up, I'm gonna follow up like immediately, like if you say something
Please,
interesting.
please.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So to start off, how did you like? How were you brought onto the project? Like, how were you made aware of Torn Banner needing a musician?
Well, I was incredibly fortunate. I actually reached out to Torn Banner um, before I even knew about Chivalry 2. I was interested in what they might be doing next, and of course, was also looking to get more involved in uh, more projects. And I actually didn't hear anything until about a year later.
Oh.
And a year later, I got a random email from Alex Hayter, one of the producers on Chivalry 2. And he was like, "Hey, you reached out like a year ago, and we didn't really need a composer at that point, but we're actually looking now. Would you be interested in doing a demo?" And so I ended up doing a demo, which is basically I just did some. They gave me sort of the brief on what Chivalry 2 was going to be and kind of what they were looking for, and then I wrote a couple of short pieces of music, sort of as an audition. Um, and, I felt like it went really it went well. I was happy with the pieces I sent in, and, they were like, "Thanks, we'll get back to you." And I kinda thought, I probably didn't get that, but at least I, had the opportunity to sort of, throw my name in the hat for, a project that I would be excited to work on. So, yeah, a little while later, I heard back, and they wanted to move forward with with hiring me. So I I was very, very fortunate. That story usually does not go that way in my experience, and I would assume most people's experience. So I feel very fortunate for sure.
Yeah, I feel you there too. I've had my
Yeah,
problems with applying too. Um,
yeah.
and for the Chivalry 2 project, you made like this more classical style of music. Like, do you also indulge in like other genres like electronic or like other kinds of music?
Oh yes, absolutely. It depends on the project. I would say, the type of stuff that I did for Chivalry 2, sort of that more traditional classical approach, like you mentioned, is sort of what I enjoy doing. In terms of just like I'm more comfortable in that space. However, I listen to a very wide range of music, and I really enjoy learning about producing music in as many different genres as I can learn. It's one of those things like as a composer, you're often asked to do things that might be outside of your wheelhouse. My background is in, songwriting and being in rock pop bands and stuff like that. So I do sort of have that background, and my relationship with classical music was very much born from my interest in film scores and video game music and things like that. So I sort of dove into that because of my love of video game music. So it's sort of a passion of mine, which is why I say I enjoy writing in that sort of more traditional classical style a lot. But yes, to answer your question, I definitely do often have to write things that are entirely outside of that genre for sure.
And in this orchestra setting that everything was recorded in, right? You also wrote on your website that you're a multi
Yeah.
instrumentalist, right? Um, where do the advantages come in of like knowing like how different instruments work? Like, is it easier to compose a track or like an album, like when having this in mind?
I would say so, absolutely. Now my background as a musician as far as playing instruments is outside of that classical world. So I can I play enough piano to sort of get by, but I do play guitar and drums and a handful of other instruments. So I sort of come at it from like I said, sort of outside of that orchestral family of instruments. So when approaching something where you're dealing with a live orchestra, I did find it was important to sort of um, really more when you're writing. Like if you know you're going to be going to live orchestra when you're writing, you do need to you need to know as much about the instruments you're writing for, in order to know what they're capable of. With sample libraries and things like that, these days, we sort of have the orchestra at our fingertips, but sometimes you can find yourself doing things that either um, aren't entirely possible with live musicians or is not ideal for live musicians, and maybe it won't translate the way you hope it will when you have a live orchestra in front of you. So I think understanding the different instruments and their limitations, and how they sound best and things like that is certainly advantageous, especially if you're just sort of approaching it from a more traditional perspective, for sure. Yeah.
Um,
So I had to sort of dive in on my own and learn and learn from people who knew more than me, for sure.
okay. Um,
Yeah.
why go for live orchestra when samples like nowadays are also like very high quality and could pass, so to speak, right?
Yes. Um, you know, that it wasn't something we were planning to do from the get-go. Um, we had the release date of the game get pushed in a way that sort of allowed us some more time. And it sort of is one of those things that with that extra time, we thought, why not get some live orchestra on this on some of the key pieces of music. Much of the score is still what you just described. It's samples. And yeah, you're right. I mean, sample libraries these days are getting better and better, and you can get closer and closer to it being uh, sort of the difference being unrecognizable, I guess, to most people's ears.
Hmm.
Um, but at the same time, I do find that when you're writing with samples in mind, you tend to write to the samples, meaning that you sort of write uh, knowing what the samples can do, and what a live musician might be able to pull off is going to be different. So it can influence sort of what you choose to write. But to answer your question, as far as why, like I just don't think that anything will ever replace the feeling of a bunch of people in a room playing music. And it might be somewhat negligible to your ears or whatever here and there, but I still there's so many intangibles, and there's such an energy to it that just can't be replicated otherwise. Not to mention, I mean, I just think that especially when you have live musicians in the room, no matter how good the samples are, no matter how beautifully they were recorded, it just sounds better. Like nothing's ever gonna replace that, in my opinion.
There's this feeling of the room, so to speak. Like, but did you also need to do some additional mixing of like the individual instruments after recording it live?
Sure. Yes, this was my first time mixing anything with with basically my first time mixing live orchestral recordings. So yeah, I had to sort of dive in, and again, like I said before, learn a lot from people who were more experienced. But a lot of it was just diving in and sort of listening. I had my mock-ups, which I was really happy with. I mean, there were times when, we would blend samples with the live orchestra to kind of make it bigger, and that happens a lot with, a lot of composers do that. But yeah, there was definitely a learning curve. It's a lot different, than just mixing soloist or mixing pop, rock music and stuff like that. Like you're dealing with a ton of mics and just sort of learning again, luckily we live in this world where we have so many resources at our fingertips where we can kind of at least have a good starting place. And certainly, if I have the option, I'm gonna have someone mix it who that's their expertise and that's what they've dedicated themselves to, and in the craft of mixing. But in this situation, it did fall on me, so I was very thankful to have those resources kind of
Hmm.
easily available to me.
When I think of like live bands, like I always think back to my school days where there's like 10 kids. We all have to do something else, like either sing something or use a piano or something, and then there's like a lot of rehearse and the stuff goes bad all the time. And
Yeah.
I wonder for, like this setting where there's like dozens of people playing different instruments, um, how much rehearse, how many tries can you afford when recording something like that? Or is it possible to, for instance, mix some parts of one recording with some parts of another recording, something like that?
Yes, and you often will do a lot of that.
Hmm.
You'll mix sort of the best takes, of each section or whatever. That being said, I mean, it depends on the amount of time you have in terms of the budget. The budget often determines how much time you have with the orchestra. So, um, that being said, I mean, these orchestras who do this specifically for a living, they're playing on, television and film and video game scores. They're sight reading everything. This is the first time they've ever seen it. And so they're sitting down right before we hit record. There's no there are I mean, again, I'm not as experienced in this as a lot of people, but in sessions like this, there's no rehearsal take. You just go and you're
Okay.
recording the whole time. And then they're expert sight readers. So what they have, and as long as as long as it's been orchestrated well, and they have, the music in front of them, um, they're very good at nailing it within a few takes, you know? Of course, if you have more time, you can get in and sort of really massage what you want out of them, and sometimes, again, you have to hear them play it in order to know, "Oh, wait, that thing I wrote in samples isn't sounding how I want it to sound now that live players are playing," and then you can direct them to play it differently, and that's what a lot of the retakes and things like that have to do with, in my experience, is sort of uh, learning as you go about what's working and what's not working to your expectations. It's not necessarily that it's played incorrectly or played poorly or anything like that. It's more that it just is coming across differently than what you want, and so then you have to sort of direct there and do another take or whatever. And often you're doing, another take of that section as opposed to the whole piece in order to save time. But as far as them needing to rehearse and things like that, like that's not they. I mean, it's go time right from when they sit down,
So they're
which is
super
pretty
pros,
impressive.
and like,
Yeah.
I guess when you just know the instrument, then you can just read the notes and then just go, like, start to
Yeah, and
finish.
when you're an expert sight reader too, like that's the skill that they sort of, and of course there are situations where you might have a soloist or something like that that's playing, in the same session with the orchestra, and they have like a complicated solo part or something like that. If possible, certainly sending that piece to the soloist ahead of time so that they can come prepared. That's something that happens, I'm sure. They may rehearse a little bit at home, but as far as the ensemble, yeah, I mean, every session I've done so far, the first time they're seeing it is when they sit down, which is
Okay.
really impressive.
Um, how much time do you take to wrap just one track for in this case for Chivalry 2? Um, is it like an entire day, or is it only, I don't know, like up to 4 hours, or how long does it
You
take?
mean you mean recording with the orchestra or just
Yeah, yeah.
in
With the orchestra, like,
okay.
how long does it take until you are comfortable and saying, okay, now we got enough, now I can do something with it?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we knocked out, let me think. I have to think back to the session. Yeah, I mean, we were knocking out several tracks you know, in just a couple of hours. Like it's not like a day long thing for a track or anything like that. Again, they're very quick and very efficient. And these kinds of sessions, we did have somewhat limited time, so we had to move through them pretty quickly. I would do things where I would take I would have the most of the time I'd hear them all play at once, but then I'd have each section play it through so that I had isolated takes of just the strings, just the brass, woodwinds, everything. So that I could kind of have more control over the mix and things like that. But also, as you mentioned before, sort of taking the best takes from everything is a little bit easier when it's separated like that. Doing that allowed me to feel more confident to move on more quickly because I knew we had it somewhere. Like if
Okay,
I knew we had what I needed somewhere. But no, it's not. I mean, again, they move through it. They move through it quicker than I think most people would. That you'd be
okay.
surprised.
And
We also
yeah.
did it in Budapest too. and I was remote in my studio in Nashville, attending in real time, not unlike what we're doing right now. And so it was kind of a interesting experience because I'm in the booth, producing, but I'm just in my studio at home communicating with the conductor and stuff like that, trying to get what I need. So, not the most ideal. I think that anyone would rather just be there, but at the same time I'm glad again that technology is where it is. And of course the pandemic even kind of pushed that even further in terms of us all having to do that for a while. So, um but yeah, I mean, it was definitely a an experience I'll never forget because Chivalry specifically was my first time hearing my music played by a proper live orchestra, which was yeah, just something I'll never forget for sure.
And the composition process, like how do you approach actually um, like starting, I mean, just in general, like an album or a production like this. Like there was some music from a first game that must have been also part of an inspiration a little bit, right? But uh,
Mhm.
what's but yeah, what do you go through in your head like when you sit down and you have an empty piece of paper and you want to compose something, you want to do something?
Sure. Aside from sort of the conversations that take place with the team, ahead of time and kind of determining what the overall musical direction is going to be, um, I think from the you know, obviously, like, at some point when you're sort of in the zone and you're working on whatever it is you're working on, you're sort of you're kind of the kind of, like, skill set part of your brain kind of takes over and you just kind of you get into a flow and you're working. But as far as when I first sit down, um, and I always kind of have to check in with this as the process goes on, I try and keep in mind, how is this gonna come across to the player when this is out and they're sitting in front of the game and they're playing it? Like, how is this gonna hit them? Because, like, again, I'm a gamer, that's my number 1 hobby, and so I know what it's like when music is doing its job, like, from the player perspective. And so I try to keep that in mind. I find it inspiring, like, especially, like, if I'm not sure where to start, if I can keep that in mind, uh, and then also sort of remind myself of that when I'm, like, a couple of hours into writing something, and then I kind of step back and say, "Okay, is this gonna serve the player well?" And sometimes you're not sure until you get a little further into the process, right? But I just think that it's sort of a good home base to always go back to whenever you're writing music. Is who is this for? How is it going to affect them when they're playing it? And is it going to serve the overall vision of what the creative team has is trying to do here with this game? And um, so yeah, that's more of a general like non-musical answer, but I do find that really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, then let's see. I'm just gonna go through here some of the. Oh yeah, so that's I guess also about composition or like how the music is recorded. Um, were there any limitations set by Torn Banner or by Ryan, like when it comes to how the music has to be, essentially?
Do you mean in terms of, like, stylistically or what it needed to do in the game or maybe or both or
Um, Pretty much both. Like for instance, like did you have limitations with reverb or with
Oh,
well, also like could you use electronic samples even though it was mostly classical, for, like stuff like that
yeah.
essentially.
No, that's great. Yeah, so, um, Torn Banner, they were great from the beginning at, um, sort of collaborating and working with me to come up with what the musical, direction of the game was gonna be. Um, they had a few criteria. They wanted it to be a very organic sounding score, like, and so to stay away sort of from you know obvious synthesizers and things like that that
Yeah.
sort of take you out of that you know sort of visceral medieval world that they're trying to create, right? So they knew that, and they knew that they were wanting it to they were wanting me to sort of do my own thing with it. Like you said, there was music for the previous game, but they sort of they gave me, permission to sort of just, like, do your own thing with it. This can be a different score from the first game. Um, and, I did ask them if, if they wanted me to reference, thematically Ryan's music from the previous game, and that was something that they gave me. Again, they were like, "Yeah, that sounds good if it's what you think will work." Like they never, pressured me to do that or required me to. They were open to it. They were open to me experimenting with that. Um and what I ended up doing with that is basically, sort of sprinkling in references to his stuff uh, within my own pieces of music. I think the only thing that they officially requested that I do was Duty and Honor.
Hmm.
And that was something that I think that had they not asked for it, I think I would have probably pushed for it myself because I think that, you want that's something going back to thinking about the players. Like if I'm a fan of Chivalry Medieval Warfare, I want to hear that track in Chivalry 2, right? So I'm very glad we did that. But to kind of answer your question about limitations, I mean, it really came more down to we th- what I thought would work with what else was going on in the audio space in the game. Um, I found pretty early on that I didn't want to do a lot of like really like low percussion and things kind of in the low end that were really prominent because um, there's so much going on in the audio space in Chivalry. There's, obviously you have all of the incredible sound design that Ryan's doing, but it's very in your face by design. And a lot of the sounds are very percussive and deep and they hit you really hard. So if I was doing a lot of rhythmic stuff, especially in the low end, I think it would just kind of muddy that up a lot, and it wouldn't really not only would the music not really stand out that much, but it would also, again, maybe make what Ryan is doing worse, which I don't wanna do, right? I don't wanna take away from what he's doing, and there are exceptions to this for sure, but I just sort of found that relying more on, like, sort of soaring melody lines and things kind of, that can kind of sit on top of all of that, uh, really kind of helped the music not only sit well in the mix, but also, serve its purpose. Like, when the music kicks in, you notice it that there's something else in the sound space that wasn't there before that's indicating and telling you something. And so, yeah, it's not necessarily that there were any limitations placed on me. Um, we were pretty settled on what our creative vision was for the music. And so beyond that, it was just more about figuring out how the music would fit in well to what was already there and what was going to be the star, I think, of the show, which is the sound design and
Hmm.
chivalry.
And yeah, I mean, duty and honor. I mean, honestly, every track that comes in, like when there's like a 2 minute limit, like the effect is noticeable. Um, I also read on YouTube on on the upload on the orchestral upload on your channel like that people like there were so many people like writing, ah, the archers are actually doing something now, or oh yeah, people are actually like picking up their weapons, they're fighting better, like they're
The
fighting
archer.
better like with the music.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like reading that, do you think mission accomplished, so to speak? Like, do you think that you did a good job? Like when you read that people are hyped for the music basically when it comes on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope so. Yeah, it's definitely always very good to read that, and it makes me feel like in some ways we accomplished our goal. Um, you know, a lot of the music in the game is sort of based on scenario, right? So that timeout music that comes in when there's 2 minutes left, obviously the goal of it is to motivate the player to either defend or advance depending on what team they're on before the time runs out, and so or to hold out for the 2 minutes depending on what team you're on. So uh, yeah, I mean, like I love reading that. I love that in some way at least we accomplished that goal of motivating the player at the right time. When it really counts and when the match is sort of on the line. So um yeah, and I think that those 2-minute pieces are really when the music comes to the forefront. The other music in the during the matches is designed to be a bit more reserved and sort of sit underneath the sound design and just kind of be there to give a little bit of color, a little bit of character, and then really kick in at the end of either the 2 minutes or at the end of the round itself. So from that perspective, yeah, I think that with Ryan's and the team's help, I think we did succeed at that. Yes.
Okay, great. I would agree. I would agree. um, and Okay, so this question cleared itself up. Like the pieces with where it's with Ryan Patrick Buckley. It's a
Mhm.
collaboration, as in like you basically made like a recomposition, so to speak. Like it's your interpretation of a track, right?
Correct. So anything that has with Ryan accredited on the soundtrack, most of it is I'm just referencing something from medieval warfare in the piece. It's There are a couple of exceptions where it's just basically my version of his piece. Like that's what Duty and Honor is, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I sprinkle some of my own stuff in, but really it's just sort of a reimagining of his track. There are one or two others like that. The rest are sort of just, hey, that's a little motif from medieval warfare that's just kind of thrown in, and the fans who recognize it will get a kick out of it, and anybody who doesn't recognize it, it's still gonna fit within
Yeah.
the piece of music that I'm writing. So, yeah, Ryan was very much, he sort of just like he was very supportive of my vision, even when I was dealing with his themes. He kind of was like, "Just go nuts," you know? And of course, he would have, feedback and ideas and stuff. But it was very much me doing my music while, sort of leaning on the references from the original game to bring some of that nostalgia. Yeah.
It's great to hear that the collaboration was there because no one really likes to work with people that are too protective of their stuff, right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's great to hear because
Yeah,
yeah,
Ryan is anything but that. I will say that working with Ryan has been such a great experience for me. I'm very thankful as a composer to have, this being my most notable project to date, to have been working not only with such a great team, but specifically Ryan is he's just a normal, nice guy, and he's not, yeah, he's not yeah, overly protective of that stuff. He wants the game to be the best it can be. He wants the music to be the best it can be. And he was, you know, everything from sort of distilling the feedback from the team into something that I could take action on, to giving, positive encouragement even when I wasn't asking. He's just random positive encouragement. Um, just a great person to work with, and I learned a lot too about game audio from just from working with him too, because he's a great audio director as well as being such a good guy.
what kind of pointers did you get from him when it comes to the audio, actually?
Well, it wasn't so much pointers as much as it was, learning what would work and what wouldn't work on the programming side from
Oh.
him. Obviously, I had some understanding, having worked on smaller projects and things like that in the past. But you know, we ended up adding post launch. We added like a persistent music system, um, that is like a tier based system. So depending on what's going on in the match, different layers of music will come in over the top of one another. And when we were sort of designing that, I really leaned on him, to kind of, you know, he would let me sort of pitch ideas, and then he was able to say, "That's a great idea. I don't know if that's gonna work for this. Maybe that should be a Chivalry 3 thing," or whatever. It's maybe a little too ambitious as far as what we already have in place, on the code side. So, me being somewhat disconnected from that, and, also somewhat and definitely inexperienced in terms of actually programming, uh, it was I was learning by basically just by working with him, because I was getting those answers from him in real time about what works and what doesn't, and what how I would need to deliver it in order for it to work, things like that.
And the progressive kind of music system, um how does it work? Is it that you have like a track that is split into different stems that like are mixed, or do you have just different stereo tracks that you like fade in and out or something?
It's exactly the first thing. So
Okay.
it's different stems, that are part of the same linear track.
Okay.
And so they're basically layered. The base layer doesn't have a whole lot going on. The second layer, when it comes in and blends with that layer, like maybe there's a little more going on, some percussion or some stings here and there, and then so on and so forth until it's sort of a full-fledged piece of music that has some momentum. It's still designed to, again, not be as big as the 2-minute music that kicks in, because I wanted that to still be the the climax. And I didn't want the music that was going on underneath the match persistently to take away from that, if that makes sense. So there are some high points in that music. It definitely ebbs and flows, but for the most part, it's a little bit, again, it's just sort of sitting underneath the sound design and things like that. But it just kind of gets subtly more intense as basically as the objective bar progresses at the top of the screen is sort of what it's tied to. Um, so um, that was kind of the challenge of doing that, was having to sort of write the music that would fit with music that was already there, that was already in the game. So, um, yeah, so again, I was glad to be working with Ryan on that. I definitely could not have done that by myself.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
what were some ideas that you thought might have been cool, but which were a little bit too ambitious for a soundtrack?
Well, I that's a good question. I think I'll just have to answer that by saying I think that, you know, that question might be better answered in the future, because hopefully we actually will be able to to do some of that in the future, but I'm not sure how, we haven't, obviously none of that's been talked about or decided, but really, it was just again, I kind of had some ideas for that persistent music system that, as far as just what would trigger the layers and when they would be triggered and how they would be triggered, that it's not that it was too ambitious necessarily. It's just that it didn't make sense to do it for Chivalry 2 when all of the infrastructure and everything was already in place for how the music would
So
work.
the framework basically was there, and for you to add this system, basically you would need to break that apart and do something new.
Right, right,
Okay.
which is something we did not wanna do. So yeah, again, that's sort of learning, something that can maybe help when you're starting at the beginning of a project, and you can kind of plan for it, and everyone's sort of, aware of what you're thinking, before everything's already in place. So that again, that's just kinda part of the learning on the job thing.
Okay. During the level, there's the dynamic music, and then at the end, the 2 minutes, like the 2 minute music, is that a linear track that you fade in, and then the dynamic music goes out?
Yeah, the 2-minute music is just a stereo track. There are a couple different versions of each piece that will play. There's the 2-minute timeout version, which is just 2 minutes long. It kicks in when there's 2 minutes on the clock. And then there's the end of round version, which kicks in during the last objective, whenever the, I guess, advancing team is getting close to winning the match, based on the objective. So there could be 4 minutes left, and it could kick in if the match is about to end. That version actually has a beginning, then it has, each of them, I think, have 3 middle sections they're all stereo tracks, but they can play in random order in a loop, those 3 middle sections.
Okay.
And then it has an ending that triggers once the match is over. So it keeps it kind of like from getting too repetitive. Because if it was just 2 minutes, if you had 6 minutes left and the objective's almost done and it's just a 2-minute track looping for 6 minutes, like that could get a little bit old. And so the kind of having those dynamic middle sections that can kind of change each time it loops again. That can kind of keep people on their toes, I guess.
Yeah, if there's too much repetition, that's immersion breaking. I mean, it's like, especially
Right.
for a multiplayer game with music, when you keep playing the game for hours on end, and you always hear
Right.
the same music, like it would drive people
Yeah.
insane.
And that actually, interestingly, that idea, as far as those sort of dynamic loops, I guess I'll call them, that came from player feedback during alpha testing. People felt like it was getting too repetitive at times. So that prompted us to not only add more tracks, but also to sort of come up with that system to where, even if you're hearing the same track again for the second time within a couple of matches or whatever, there are sections of it that you might not have heard yet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, so then, okay, the limitations things, that's done. Um, I haven't really looked at the questions again because we're like in it,
Yeah,
you know.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, I looked at them like earlier today, and I mean, and also when you first sent them. But
mhm. Okay. So, simple one. Favorite track from the compositions.
I think my favorite track on the soundtrack is it's a track called Phaedrad's Ghost, and it plays in the game. It plays during the main menu after the main theme plays, which I also am proud of the main theme as well. But something about Phaedra's Ghost, it's a very sort of very sparse, sort of reserved, slower track, I guess. And especially compared to the rest of the soundtrack, it stands out maybe because of that. It's it's more of a vibe setting kind of track for the player as they peruse the menu. And I think I just love how simple it is. It features a solo viola, uh, and yeah, I don't know. I just there's something about that track that I was just proud of it, and it came together very quickly, and I was instantly like, yes, this is right. So that's probably my favorite track on the whole soundtrack.
Were some tracks like really? I mean, I have this with my projects as well. Were there some tracks where you thought, "I'm glad this is over. This was annoying, or this was really difficult to do."
Um, I don't know if I'd say annoying, but difficult, yeah. And certainly a relief when I felt like I was happy with it. And that's honestly the main theme of the game. The music that plays right when you boot up the game. There was something about, I think it was like a mental thing, something about it sort of being my first proper main theme, you know, that again, players are gonna hear right when they boot up the game, like, it needs to make a positive impact, right? Um, and so I think I just lost the most sleep over it, and I was tweaking right until, like, the last minute in terms of mixing and things like that, because that was also one of them that we did live orchestra with. And it was also one of those things where actually there is uh, another final version of it that didn't include the live orchestra that I had already like stressed over and was already like, losing sleep over, but finally came to something I was happy with and turned it in and it was approved and everything was good. And then suddenly we have this extra time and it's like, what if we did live orchestra? So now, which is great, and I'm very glad we did that, but now I have to start that process over in my head of like, oh, now I have to stress out about this some more because now it's not done anymore. And obviously comparing the two versions, I'm so glad that we did live orchestra, but yeah, I think it's just wanting to do right by the players and putting that pressure on myself that made that piece of music in particular uh pretty stressful. And there's not necessarily any particular part of it that was more stressful than anything else. I think it was just sort of a general um a general concern that like, hey, when the player hears this, it's the first music they're going to hear from Chivalry 2. It's not just are they gonna like it, but is this going to bring them into the world of Chivalry 2 in a proper way, right? So, yeah, I just think that I put more pressure on myself from that than I did because having played in the alpha, like I could tell the music was working with everything else going on, right? With Ryan's amazing sound design and like the music when it would kick in, I could tell it was working. And the feedback from, players and testers, is that it was. Um, but when you have a main theme that's just that there's not anything else going on, right? It's just the music and it's in your face. And that's a little bit more scary. And yeah, so I think that was the most difficult piece of music for sure to come together to something to where I could finally say, okay, it's done. I'm happy with it. Let's send it off for approval. And it took me the longest to get to that point with the main theme versus anything else.
When you were composing the music, when you were like recording stuff, like were you also like playing development versions of the game, like kind of trying to figure out like what do I do with this, like how do I make my music to fit the game?
Yes. Yes, especially early on, I was playing, anytime they would do, like alpha tests or things like that, or they also did, like, a closed beta that I played a lot of. But also, I would just hop into the latest developer build and just into a match by myself or whatever, and just sort of listen to how the music was coming in and things like that, and determining whether I needed to adjust anything on my end. And yeah, I was especially early on when I was first writing those pieces of music that were first going into the game. I was in the build a lot, and as time went on and you sort of understand the puzzle pieces that you need to deliver, and if you deliver them in this certain way, it's going to work. I was probably doing less of it as time went on, until there would be a build that was significantly different than the one before it. But yeah, I definitely played a lot in during development.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'm asking that one because for the previous sound design project that I made on Mirror's Edge, like I asked a musician, well, you obviously played the game, right? And then he said, no, I did everything over video playback. So they sent him
Yeah,
screen recordings, and then he basically composed to the screen
yeah,
recordings, which was pretty surprising for me. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
And I will say, as I'm composing, that's what I'm doing. I have like they sent me a lot of alpha gameplay of like alpha tests with real players and stuff. So if I was composing something for a specific map, for example, I would have footage of that map going, and it wouldn't necessarily match up with how it would, once it's implemented in the game. But it's just more about sort of getting the visuals in front of you, so you kind of have the vibe and everything like that of what the music is going to need to do for that map or that scenario or whatever. So I could definitely see successfully doing it. I think that when you're getting into really, really, really interactive music, and maybe it's just because, again, this was my first, this is the most notable thing I've done. I really wanted to dive in and kind of hear it during development and make sure
Hmm.
I got it right. I didn't want my first notable project to be something that people are like, man, he should have played the game more, or whatever. So I wanted to make sure my bases were covered. Plus, it was just a lot of fun to play it during development. We had a really good group of alpha testers that were great about, giving great feedback. So that was,
Hmm.
something I immersed myself in.
Okay. Um, I read on your website as well that you did a bunch of TV productions, and I wonder, um, what are some differences when comparing for TV production and game production? Like, is there like something that is significantly different? Like, for instance, the STEM stuff, or
Yeah. That's where a lot of the differences come in for sure. When you're composing for television or film, obviously it's very linear. You have a scene in front of you that you're writing music for. You know exactly where the emotional high points and low points and things like that are going to be. And it's when I was uh, writing music for like the cinematics and things like that for Chivalry 2, very similar, right? It's just
hmm.
a linear piece of media that you're scoring. Yeah, where the differences really come in is that the in match music, whether it's the dynamic music or even the timeout music and things like that. Because even though those are just stereo pieces of music that loop, um, you don't necessarily know what's going to be happening exactly on screen when that kicks in.
Hmm.
So that music needs to serve a more general purpose and fit a number of possible scenarios versus, if you're scoring a cinematic, you know exactly where your music is going to be. You know exactly what it's going to be communicating. So I think it's just maybe whenever you're actually producing the music, there aren't as many differences, but when you're conceptualizing it, there definitely are. You have to think about what it's going to be used for. And then the layered music, the dynamic music is sort of a different story altogether in terms of I did find that I was having to approach that completely differently.
Hmm.
So yeah, because each layer needs to be able to sort of stand on its own as well as together. So naturally, that's just going to be a lot different than composing something that you're just going to be delivering in stereo that's going to play the exact same thing every time someone watches it. Um, so yeah, there are certainly some pretty key differences there.
Yeah, I guess with the stems, there's like this functional side to it, which is very important because when you just listen to the linear music, I mean, that's like a whole piece, right? But like being able to deconstruct and reconstruct the music, that's like, is it difficult for you to approach it like that? Like when it was like something new to you, like was it at first a bit alien?
Definitely, definitely. Um, I found that, because like some of these early dynamic pieces that we did were pushing like 20 minutes long. Um, and so I found that I was really having to take it section by section and build it that way. So I would take like, 2.5 minutes or whatever made sense musically, but around that length of time at a time and sort of work on that and build out each layer. Um, because I was finding that if I was getting too deep into the piece, it was harder for me to then construct another layer on top of that. Even if I had in mind what I was wanting to do, it was really hard to sort of fully realize that in larger chunks of music. So I was having to sort of take it a section at a time, almost like you writing a song, right? Um, but yeah, it was definitely very foreign because again, you're even from the way that you're having to mix it and things like that, you're having to make decisions that you might not have otherwise made, just because you know that that layer, while it might not be as prominent when everything else is going on, it needs to stand on its own because it might be playing by itself. And so you might make that a little bit more prominent in the mix than you would have, if you were just mixing again, just a stereo piece of music. So yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of little different things that change whenever you're working on a dynamic piece of music for sure.
I don't really have too many more questions anymore, but I guess the one thing I would like to ask is, why games as a medium? For like, why did you like choose to contact Torn Banner? Uh, like, do you like working for games? Like, would you prefer it over other mediums, or yeah, where do your preferences lie and why, basically? Yeah.
I certainly uh, prefer working on games. And I think part of it is because it's something I've worked towards for a long time specifically. I still work on other projects and things like that, but I think as far as what I'm really passionate about is games. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about before, about it sort of being my main hobby, and I know how impactful they can be from the player's standpoint. Um, I remember booting up, I was probably 13 or 14 years old, obviously very aware of video game music before that, and I was into video games for a long time before that, but I booted up Final Fantasy X on my PlayStation 2 for the first time, and, the piece of music that opens that game is called, To Xanarkand, and it's just this beautiful solo, piano, very delicate, very sparse, simple, beautiful melody, but not a whole lot going on. It's simple and to the point, and it plays as the main character sort of narrating how they got to this point. And that was the first time I experienced a piece of music in a video game that affected me emotionally in that way because I didn't know anything about these characters yet. I didn't know anything about their journey, but the music, along with that simple narration, was telling me that they had been through some stuff, right? Like, so it was sort of immediately engaging to me and emotional to me in a way that while I loved video game music before that and, it was things were I knew it was great and it was getting stuck in my head. That was the first time I realized that video game music could be effective emotionally.
Hmm.
And so, and obviously that's not the first time it ever was. It's just for me, that's the first time I experienced it. So, I think from that point forward, it sort of planted this seed in my head. I mean, I've been involved with music in some way since I was a child. So I think at some point, or in some way, I guess that moment was more significant than I may have realized in the like while I was experiencing it, because it planted this seed of like, oh, there's a way to really connect with people through music in a video game. And I love video games, and I already connect with them. So why would I not want to use something that I feel that I'm, okay at doing, that I love doing, like, as far as this art form of music, why would I not wanna use that in a way that can affect maybe some other, 13 or 14-year-old or however old you are, booting something up. So it was just, uh yeah, I think that was a pivotal moment for me for sure. And I think music is also very unique in video games versus in other mediums. And um, I mean, the fact that it's like it exists to enhance what's already there in the game, but it also can exist on its own in the form of soundtrack albums and things like that. Um, just really cool to think that, like, someone might be listening to a piece of music that you wrote, and it's reminding them of a fun night of playing Chivalry 2 that they had with their friends. Just to be able to, be a part of someone's life or, in that way, it's just a huge honor. And obviously, it's not that other mediums I mean, I love film and TV too, but there's just something about the interactive and community focused, nature of a lot of games, especially like Chivalry 2, that really lend themselves more to that experience, I think. So, sorry, that was a little bit long-winded, but hopefully you got my
No
point.
problem, no problem. And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess in that context, you kind of eat your cake and have it too. Like when it comes to, like for one, you make the kind of more dynamic music for the game, or like like you design the music in a way where it like needs to be for the game. But then for the like, for instance, the Bandcamp release, I bought that one, by the way, really great. Yeah,
You
that one, like for instance, that one is like more like directed, right? Like that's more okay.
Yeah,
I'm gonna mix it differently to make it more listenable
curated,
for
yep. Mhm.
casual listening.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
That's kind of a different, ball game altogether. You're taking what you've already done. Like, a lot of that music wouldn't make for a great listening experience if it was just presented in the clips that play in the game, right? So, you curate it in a way that where you're I mean, I was even pulling things from the cutting room floor to create longer pieces of music, for example, just to make for a better listening experience, a better a flow. Um, so yes, it is a kind of a different. It's like you have to use a different part of your brain when you get to that part. And there's actually a lot of music that's not um, available yet in soundtrack form. So it's one of those things to where um, you you hope that you can create sort of an A to Z sort of listening experience that is both complete in the eyes of the players, like they're hearing everything they want to hear that they like from the game, but it's also not just throwing 7-second pieces of music at them, uh, you know, because that doesn't make for a great album. And I know some composers that just throw everything on there and it works really well, but I just kind of felt like it needed to sort of um, be designed in a way to kind of take the player on a little bit more of a journey. And yeah, that was maybe my favorite part of all this is getting to sort of curate that and get it all together. So
I think it's a good effort. I mean, it is a cohesive experience from beginning to end. And I think when I type the script out for, I don't know how long I'm gonna listen to the album on repeat, most likely, like because
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean,
yeah,
it's Chivalry. I mean, it's very, I mean, yeah, I will be playing that a lot. Um,
well, good.
and
Glad.
yeah, as for actually one thing that's interesting, I did see this before, where an album, where like a soundtrack album, like from Unreal Tournament 3 by Ron DePrisco. What he did, like he has basically disc one, which is like the good shit, like A to Z, like
Yeah.
the cool music. But then there's a second CD, which is the bonus stuff, where there's like the stingers. But
Oh, interesting.
I
Yeah.
never listened to CD2 though. Because
Right.
it's unlistenable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's why would you listen
Yeah.
to that? Um,
I think
yeah,
yeah, and I don't want to speak to what his thinking or what their thinking was, but I mean, I think it's good to just give the players everything, right? Like I think that's a good approach for sure.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I also think that might be a really cool sort of best of both worlds because you're getting to do your curated version that I think most people will listen to. But then for those handful of people that really want everything and they don't want anything left out, even if it's
yeah.
just a short stinger or whatever, you're kind of satisfying that as well, so without throwing it into the album, the curated album. Like you're keeping it separate, even though it's part of the same thing. Like that might be a pretty cool approach, actually. I think I like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So that's pretty much all it from me. Um,
Cool.
if you if you have any questions about the production or like about me or something, then go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I would love. I watched some of your YouTube stuff. Incredibly well put together. Like I love that you're like your kind of channel is like my bread. Like that's what I get. I get down the YouTube rabbit hole, and like your kind of channel is like right up my alley. So,
Ah, cool.
uh,
Cool.
I think you do a really good job. So are you? Well, I guess I would ask like just general time frame. Like, what are you thinking in terms of when this might actually come together and be out there for people to watch?
Um, lately I'm loading myself up with stuff to do, and I like constantly work on my shit. So I think that I think it's gonna be pretty speedy. The Mirror's Edge one that took 4 months, but that was only 4 months because I had to wait on emails. With like finding contacts and getting into like interviews and stuff. So pretty much as soon as I'm finished talking to Ryan Buckley, uh, it's just gonna go. Like it's gonna be pretty
Yeah.
quick. So I think if anything, it's gonna take max a month, but I don't think it's gonna take that long. I think like the longest part really is like doing the script, and once that's done, then production's very quick. So
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited to be a part of it, and I hope you got some usable stuff here.
a lot. I
Yeah.
actually did not realize that like during the gameplay there's dynamic music. I
Yes.
didn't actually know that. And
Yeah. It's very subtle, and I will say it's actually much more we hyped it up a little bit in this update. Like when you're playing the new Tenosian maps, you probably notice it a lot more.
yes,
The ones from the original one are a little bit more they're very ambient with some exceptions where it kind of comes in where you notice it every once in a while, but for the most part it's incredibly ambient and more tonal. Whereas the stuff in the Tenosian one, it's a little bit you'll probably notice it more. But yeah, that's cool. I'm glad I was able to kind of shed some light on that.
okay, yeah, uh,
Yeah.
and that's why I like doing interviews, because the thing is, like a lot of my older videos, I don't really like them too much because a lot of the stuff about game design or sound design, I'm just talking out of my ass, kind of, like I didn't have the courage yet to go ask people like, hey,
Right.
uh, people that most likely won't talk to me. Like that was like my mindset. Like, hey, can
Right.
you please talk? I didn't have the courage to do that back then. So like,
Yeah.
and now
Right.
with interviews, people tell you stuff which you didn't know about. Which of course this is why I'm doing it. So
Yeah.
it's really cool. Yeah. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, have a great rest of your evening, and yeah, again, this was a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. I had fun too. Yeah. Bye bye.
All right. Bye.